So we're continuing to talk about parent-adult-children relationships. And in my next few videos, I'm going to be talking about the progression of how do we get from having what we think are pretty good relationships to getting to a place of estrangement. Or if we don't go that far, at least, even at the least, this tension and this feeling like we can only be very surfacey with each other, because if we don't, it's going to cause problems or conflict. But before I get there, I want to kind of define the roles of each party in this, because everybody has their part. Nobody gets a free pass here. And so I want to talk about, first of all, what everybody needs to do, but then what do adult children need to think about, and what do parents need to think about before we even start talking about where this goes if we don't bring some correction to these situations. So as far as I'm concerned, everybody needs to do two things. The first one is we need to work on ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, is there some areas that I have some brokenness in, some woundedness in, I'm not managing my emotions well, I'm not managing my thinking well, then you probably need to work on that individually. Before you even get into these conversations. The second thing is, if you are walking around with a lot of hurt and resentment toward the other party, you need to resolve that, or at least begin to process it, because that's going to come into every conversation that you have. I want to talk first to the parents, and I want to talk about what your part is in this. Now, as I've said in previous videos, I'm kind of in the middle in here because I'm the age of the parent of adult children, but I also talk to a lot of adult children, and I totally get where they're coming from. And so I see the two sides very clearly. And I feel in most cases, and of course there's extreme cases, and I just want to make it clear, I'm not talking about that right now. I'm not talking about abuse, addiction, or mental illness right now. I'm just talking about families, mainly Christian families, that have found themselves in this place that they don't even know how they got there, that either we are having such disconnect between each other, we have conflict, or we even have estrangement. So what would be a parent's part in all of that? Well, number one, I am just going to say this, and I think it's going to be hard for some people to take. It's my opinion, you can disagree, but I think parents, they own the bigger part in this. We have to take a bigger part for this connection and for this repair, for the simple fact that we do have decades ahead of our adult children. We also should be hopefully walking in a little bit more maturity because we are older, and if we're not, we need to work on that. We also have to acknowledge that we raised these children and we were not perfect, because we can't be. We're not perfect people. And so we made mistakes. We all made mistakes, and some of those mistakes were unintentionally hurtful to our children who are now adults. And they need to be able to talk about that sometimes. They need to be able to express that. We need to be able to let them talk about that without getting defensive or denying it or minimizing it. So there's a few things I feel parents need to really begin to think about. Number one, we need to respect our adult children with whatever decisions, whatever life they have chosen, even if we don't agree with it. They're adults and they have a right to do that, just as we did. We need to own our part in this without explaining things away, blaming things, or making excuses. We need to show change. If we are really making a commitment that things are going to be different, then there should be something different in us. And then I'm going to talk to the adult children for a moment. So if you're an adult child, there's some parts you need to own and take responsibility for if you're wanting to have a better relationship with your parents. Number one, if you have a tendency to dismiss your parents' ideas or beliefs as inferior of yours, because maybe they're older, you need to examine that, because just like they should be respecting you and your decisions and your beliefs, that goes both ways. And it doesn't mean you have to agree, but there needs to be a level of respect. It's respecting who they are. So ask for their perspective and learn to disagree well. The second thing I would really encourage adult children to think about is not becoming so independent and pushing away so much that you don't have room for your parents in your life anymore. There's a better option to that, to include your parents in your life in appropriate ways, whatever works for you. And I know if there's been hurt, there's going to be, it's just going to take time to regain some of that. Call, text, make plans with them. And that can be however much time or space you need. But if you have a desire to have that relationship, you've got to come and bridge that gap a little bit also. And that's the way you can do it. And then this is huge for adult children. And I think you just have to get to a place of accepting, and this is not an excuse, it's just a reality, that your parents are human. And often when they were raising you, they were young and immature, and they were broken and wounded because of whatever happened to them in their life. And we have to acknowledge that, because that's just true. So this carries with it, when we don't see our parents as human, it carries with us resentments and unrealistic expectations. And the better option is that sometimes we do have to just grieve the loss of what we thought our mom or our dad or our parents were going to be, or what we want them to be, the type of parent we wanted them to be. We need to grieve that loss, and we need to accept, and we need to practice empathy and forgiveness, and see that your parents came from a place of hurt and pain that formed how they are and has affected them. So that's your part. And again, doing the same thing I talked about in the end, the beginning, making sure that you're working on yourself, and that you are choosing, because it is a choice, to let go of resentments. It's the only way we're going to move toward restoration, repair, and getting rid of this disconnect. So I want to just real quick, just kind of add this part to it. And this kind of goes for everybody. You know, one thing I do, and I do thousands and thousands of these in what I do, I work through a healing process, a spiritual healing process with many people. And one of the aspects of what we use is the genogram. So what we do with that genogram, we always look at parents and grandparents, and we just look at the patterns. We see where we've come from. And it's a powerful tool. And I would encourage you to maybe do something like that. Just do a little family tree. Because what it will help everyone to do is have better understanding. The one thing I want to encourage, especially adult children, is not to blame. Blaming does not help anybody, but we do want to understand. So when we can begin to do a family tree, a genogram, you can see your parents, you can see where they came from and how that affected them. But then parents, you can begin to look and see how things that came down to you are affecting your adult children. And then everyone can start to break these generational patterns that are not serving anyone well. So stay tuned for my next video. I'm going to be talking about the very beginning stage of where we begin to see the breakdown of this relationship. And it's what I'm going to call stage 1, family tension.